Hello listeners, welcome to another Footnote episode of the Fantasy Animation Podcast. I'm Alex Sargent.
And I'm a continually transforming Chris Holliday.
Well, yes, indeed, transforming before my very eyes, and you're about to transform yourself into an expert on morphing, Chris.
Right.
Morphing is a term that we just talked about in the previous episode. It's a key concept within, I guess, the grammar or the technical language used to describe particularly digital technology, but I suspect you could probably talk about it in other forms.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people have offered some interesting ideas on the kind of political and aesthetic dimensions of morphing. So let's get going, shall we? I'll start the timer. So first thing is, obviously we're talking about the small claymation character from Aardman, right? Is that right? Yeah.
That's the situation as I understand it. No, we were talking about whether to call this metamorphosis or morphing, and actually, I suppose
morph indeed.
Well, yes, but metamorphosis feels like an adjective to describe a process, whereas almost the morph has become a sort of a noun to describe a set of often kind of characters that are embedded within what Vivian Sobchak in a recent book calls the culture of quick change. So she edited a book essentially around visual transformation in the year 2000, which was looking back over Hollywood cinema, or media culture, but with a few examples drawn from Hollywood cinema, and basically argues that the morph is a unique object that has sort of gained prominence within visual culture, often at the hand, sort of fatigue, but the role of the digital in creating a series of images that are unstable, that are open to change, that, as I said, are embedded within this culture of quick change. So it's not hard to find examples of digital technology that has enabled a process of metamorphosis. So objects, figures, human characters often transforming into other states of being. So that's what I would understand as the morph. This is a character who is morphing from one state to another. Now, there are lots of other things one could say. I think one is historical. One could go back to our episode on plasmaticness and talk about the relationship that plasmatic, fluid, flexible bodies have in relation to more concrete states of being. So plasmaticness is a process of transformation and metamorphosis, I would say. So there's an element of that. One is obviously the technological element, that digital technology has enabled kind of a pristine illusionism or a more convincing way of articulating morph. So again, I guess going to loads of fantasy movies, there are fantasy movies that involve this as a kind of visual effect. Sure. A changing of state, a disintegration, a transgression of what we understand as physically possible, the boundaries of realism. So there's something kind of political and transgressive about the morph.
I wonder if, because it's often linked with CGI and VFX, it seems to be sort of particularly present there.
Yeah.
The difference between, at least me as a lay person observing these phenomenons, and the plasmaticness of the rubber hosing of the Mickey Mouses that we've talked about before, is that one, there's an implied stability in the morph still, which I think might speak more to contemporary politics, which is like it's like plasmaticness, freedom from once an allotted form.
Yeah.
This is not freedom from any form. It's the ability to move from one form to another.
Yes.
So I think there's that to flag up. And then the other thing to flag up is it's done in an oddly photorealistic register, almost as if the morph could be photographed, or there's a fantasy that the morph could be somehow made on camera. Yeah. So I don't know, does any of that chime with the way people conceptualize morphing and things like that? I'm thinking of like the Michael Jackson black and white music video, right? Or he's pointing at his nose.
I wrote. Do you know what? I wrote that down. Depending on when this comes out. Yeah, Willow. So Willow, when we talked in the Willow podcast about the digital morph, I wrote down. So 3 years later. So Willow's 1988. 3 years later, you have Michael Jackson's black and white music video from the Dangerous album, released 91, 92, that sort of time. And that culminates in a series of digital morphs that plays across racial identity markers, so moving between black women, white women, black men, white men, continually flowing. And you're right that the photorealism or the realistic properties afforded by digital technology have meant that there is a fluency or fluidity between different kind of states of being. And I think that's part of the reason why Sobchak and who edited this book on the morph is talking about the year. So even the first chapter by Kevin Fisher is, there is a history of the morph, but we are talking about it today because digital technology has enabled these continually transforming states of being, but almost in a way that each being is fixed. It's the process that's unstable. Whereas you're right, in plasmaticness, the whole body is always primed, ready for transformation. But I think in the case of the morph, and a film like Terminator 2: Judgment Day, where the morph is the defining principle of that half human, half or human-looking liquid metal style character. Sure. He has moments of stability. It's the process that's fluid, where you're right that cell-animated characters always seem to be potentially...
Is there something like, isn't it something perhaps about the politics of our time versus the politics of, say, like Eisenstein's time there then? I'm really just speculating now. So like Eisenstein is trying to articulate a kind of Marxist utopian classless future where we're all living in
plasmatic harmony.
Yeah, plasmatic harmony, which after the last 100 years of history seems an impossible ludicrousy now, right? So now what we seem to have is a desire or an articulation of transformation, but the transformation can't be beyond some kind of fixed identity, but you at least have the freedom to select that identity for yourself. So like if this is not post-racial, black and white isn't post-racial, that kind of naff bit where the character morphs into all the different races.
It's white.
It's you can pick whichever race you want.
But those are stable enough.
Yes,
those are stable.
It's not the concept of race that we will destabilise. It's your own individuality within that. You're black or white. Doesn't matter if you're black or white, but you're definitely one of them.
I think there's and again, I'm.
So we're no longer able to imagine a system of identity politics outside the societal norm, so to speak.
Yes.
Right? So the game becomes. The enabling politics become, what label do I wish to identify with, rather than are these labels useful anymore? Yeah,
there's a spectre looming large over this discussion that I'm not the person to talk about, and that's the notion of queerness, of queer states of being, and plasmaticness as perhaps an early indication of animation's ontology as a queer medium, its ability to kind of transgress and destabilize and fragment and so forth. There's also kind of definitions of queerness, living outside normative structures, occupying non-normative spaces, defined through mobility, defined through transformation, defined through performativity. One could argue that the morph is a sort of... I was going to say that the morph... process of morphing is to engage in a visualizing of queerness, because it's about your ability to mutate is the wrong word, but to perform and embrace,
transform.
To embrace transformation. It's that. But I mean, I'm sort of interested in what you said about the black and white video, where that's 91. So that's 30 years ago.
Yes.
And that feels a little bit more rigid than the tech, as you say, a little bit more rigid than the technology is sort of seeming to suggest. Actually, we have multiple identities, and I think that's the difference between diversity and sort of a kind of a queer state of being, which is a little bit more radical, a little bit more violent. It's sort of connected to processes of decolonization. We need to kind of rethink the way that we think about things, rather than just the black or white music video, which is a series of people of different races and ethnicities. But you could be any one of those, but as long as you are one of them, I guess, is what you were saying. Whereas I feel like there's not a lot more work that I can't do and I'm not placed to do, but thinking about the role of mobility and movement and transformation in relation to queerness, and also in relation to animation, but also in relation to the morph as a queer state, or as a site of queering, let's say. So I think there's lots of things. The morph entails a lot of different things.
Listeners, I've been doing that in about 4 episodes now, but you only heard one of them, so God bless my editing skills.
The cough, yeah.
Sorry for the coughing. Yes, great. Yeah, I think that was a really useful summary. And I think it represents visually and experientially a lot of political discourses that are going on, sort of, as debates. So, if people want to read more about the morph,
Okay.
Where can they go?
Okay, so one is big and one is small. The big one is, I think, I go to it a lot, but Paul Wells's Understanding Animation has a section on metamorphosis generally, and talks about metamorphosis and the ability to morph as not only unique to the animated form, but as the constituent core of animation itself. So that's from 1998. And then a couple of years later, Vivian Sobchak's edited collection, Metamorphing, Visual Transformation and the Culture of Quick Change. So I think that's a more up-to-date, even though it's kind of a couple of decades old, there's a lot in there, edited collection around the history of the morph, and also representing contemporary visual culture with a bit of technology thrown in as well. There's also a couple of other blog posts, definitely on our website, that talk about kind of queerness and queer theory that might be really useful to access some of the things we're saying about morphing.
Absolutely great. Sounds good. Okay, well, thanks very much, Chris. Thanks everyone for listening. If you've got a suggestion for a future Footnote episode, you can email us at fananimresearch, FANANIM research @gmail.com, and you can use the same handle on our Twitter, Facebook and Instagram to get in touch with us. The website is fancy-animation.org, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.